My edits aren't perfect. If you can't hear it when the rest of the instruments are playing, then it doesn't matter. Today, I'm gonna teach you how I did this. All right, we're gonna hang out in Studio One for a while. This is where I record all my songs. This is what the song looks like. Cool, and we'll just start with the drums. I use Superior 3. It's the pop punk one. I've kind of built my own kit here. This is what the drums sound like, just like by themselves. And then I guess we'll just start off with the kick. It's like a pretty good sounding kick. First, I'll EQ the crap out of it. Not really doing much, literally just pulling out around 250 and then boosting the shit out of the 8K region on the kick. To make it real punchy. All of this stuff that I'm doing, you can do with free plugins. So if you're like, oh, I can't afford any of this stuff, you can do it all for free. You just copy what I'm doing. With free plugins. I do a lot of free plugins, so you can make it work if you want to make it work. Next, I put up a transient thingy, transient attack, transient button, whatever. So we're just jacking up the punchy part of the kick and then pulling out a bunch of the sustains so that it's like really just up in your face. Then there's a compressor. This is an 1176 style compressor or a FET compressor. So we're just going with a pretty slow attack so that the punch comes through, and then a super slow release. Is that right? That is right. And that's just like tightening down a lot more of that decay and making it super punchy because we love that. And then -3 or 4 dB of gain reduction. Then I've got a tape saturation plugin. And that's just adding some more low end back into it. Now we've pulled a bunch out and made it all pointy. I want to make it a little thicker and distorting it just a little bit because we love distortion. That's going to be the main key here, is that distortion is the best thing that you can do. And then just some final EQing. And that's just jacking up the 8K frequency range to make it super pointy again. So here's what it sounds like before. And that's our kick. Then I'll bring in a kick sample. There's nothing special about that kick sample. It's just like really flat and punchy, and I just like putting it in there. And then I've got all of that going to a bus right here, and then we add a little bit more EQ onto it. And this EQ is for both the kick and the kick sample, and it's just some low end. Just to make it a little thick, bringing up all that sweet, sweet low after removing a ton of it. Okay, next we'll do the snare. Now, usually I'll try to mix all this stuff together. So I'll start with the kick and then I'll build on top of the kick, and I'll do all my work with the previous sound going. So I only start flat from the kick from the very beginning and then build the track on top of everything so that I'm not getting like weird ideas about how things sound. It's just all working together instead of it sounding good in solo, but it doesn't fit. It's like pretty good sounding snare. It's whatever this is. And then I found the snare from that Paramore song. You know the one. I found a sample and I just mix it in there to make it sound ridiculous and unnecessarily big. Then we EQ it. There's a lot a lot going on here. Pushing up around 200 because that's where the fundamental frequency of a snare drum is. Then pulling out some stuff to make it less ringy. So I had to get really scalpely in this because of the sound of the Paramore snare. Very tight EQ curves around 350, 550, and 1,000 to make space for other stuff. And then we'll want to put a little bit in around 2K because that's where the harmonic is for the attack. And 6,500 for some top end clarity. It's a little boxier, and I like boxy. Hi, I'm boxy. Then we've got a transient shaper, just janking up the attack and pulling out some sustain. See, it's like really punchy now, right in your face. Then we've got this compressor. It's doing similar to what the compressor on the kick was doing. Just making it super punchy, really tight attack, and killing a lot of the sustain. Then we're running through the tape simulator again. That's adding warmth and a little bit of that sustain back, and a little bit of EQ, just boosting up around the same as the kick drum, because why the hell not? Eight kilohertz sounds just like great on drums. It's a nice sounding thing. There's a lot of attack there. And then I have a sample that I mix in. It's not particularly interesting, but I just like to mix it in the other snare. Then we've got both of those coming out here to this aux with another EQ on it, and it looks like there's a big roll-off to get rid of a bunch of the low ends so it doesn't build up and take up space. Then we've got a little bit of a push around 2K, which is that first frequency fundamental harmonic. And then, oops, more 8K it looks like, just to really make it so saucy. So saucy. That's nice. It's nice. It's punchy. It's snary. It's like slapping you across the face. So I'll usually just like go to a spot that has toms and then loop it and then try to mix that way. So let's just see what this gives us. That's all right. Similar to everything else, we're going to EQ it. We're going to pull a bunch of low end out. It looks like I took out whatever this frequency is, 400, a couple other like tweaky ones, and then jacked up 8K. That really just makes it snappy. We got a transient designer, same thing. I'm pulling a lot of sustain out because the toms have a lot of sustain to them, which can kind of get lost in the mix. Then we're compressing it. Again, bringing out some attack, removing some sustain, tape simulator. Hotter and spicier, and boosting the 8K. Then we've got these overheads where we finally get to hear some cymbals. There we go. It's mostly just cleaning up a lot of low end because it doesn't need to be there, and then adding a bit of high end around 5K, and then I'm cutting off the low end around 160. Stops it from being as messy in the low end, and that's going to be a big part of mixing, is not letting things get too messy in the low end, because that's a scary place to be. And then I've got this tape simulator again, just to make it gritty. It just makes things splatty, but any sort of tape distortion thing is going to do that, and we love it. Distortion. Then we've got the hi-hat. Just have some EQ on it to take a lot of low end out. You won't hear much of a difference because hi-hat is mostly high-end information anyway, and a lot of it's in the overheads. Then we've got the ambient microphone. It's just sound of the room, basically. Just EQing it. Pulling out a bunch of the mid-range so it doesn't get in the way of the vocals and the guitars later. It looks like some 300 and some 10K because there's some sweet sizzly sound in the 10K that makes it sound very alive and very nice. And then we've got this trash mic. It's cool, but I don't want too much of it because it can be really overbearing. But you can hear it adds a bit of energy, which is sick. And then I have it EQ'd, so it's literally just the mid-range. It's only 100 hertz and a little bit around that. And that's pretty much it. I have this plugin on the ambience, which just spreads the stereo field out a little bit, moves it out of the middle so that the ambience is wide, filling up space. You won't really be able to hear very much, but it's happening. And then I have, this is a send from the kick drum that's going off somewhere else that we'll come to later. But just be aware that this is a little spicy secret that comes in handy in a big way. Okay, and then I have the drums all grouped together, coming through here and split out into two aux groups, which are these two right here, this one and this one. Everything is just coming to this channel. And then I'm going to compress the snot out of it. We're going with a pretty slow attack. So the transient comes through and then really crushing the release. 50 milliseconds, super fast. That makes it super punchy. The punch needs to be punching. And then this is a tape saturation plugin. It's free that you can use. It's like running it through a big old tape machine. Just gives it a lot of life. And then I have this feeding off to something called the drum crush. And that's just a sending the entire drum kit somewhere else so I can affect it on its own. But it's going pre-fader, so it's coming before all these effects right here. So I'm getting a clean version of it that I can affect again. The first thing to do is this one, it's called crush. We're gonna obliterate this drum kit. So I'm hitting it really hard. This is like 20-to-1, really aggressive compressor. Really bringing out the transient and squashing it. And then it's coming into this distortion plugin called Barrier because we love distortion. Crazy, right? And then that just gets mixed in against the other drums. It just makes them way punchier. You compress it, you distort it, full send. And then I've got it sending off to a reverb channel. It starts with an analog delay, going at 1.8 and 38% wet. You can barely hear it, but if you listen after it stops. And then I've got this one knob wetter thing, which is just a reverb knob, making it saucy. Very saucy. We could go saucier, but this sounded good. And then EQing it, just taking low end off so it doesn't pile up in the low end, especially with all those delays, because then it'll interfere with the kick and it won't sound good. That just adds a bit of life to it, some movement, and we love movement. Not as much as we love distortion, but movement is good. Then I have the sleigh bell sample. This is my nightmare, just listening to this forever. I have this EQ'd to pull out all of the low end, so it's just just high end free information. So that it doesn't fight with the drums too much, because you've got the hi-hat on one side and then I've got the sleigh bells on the other, so it's balancing things out. They're both basically the same kind of sound, so spreading them out is good. And I've got this thing called heat wave, which is just distortion. And it just makes it stick out a bit more. And that's the hope and the dream, is for everything to be heard. And then finally, I run everything through an all drum aux right here. Starting off, this is a weird trick that I do to separate the low end information from the high end information. I'm gonna go through this as quickly as possible and try to explain it in a good way. There are plugins that let you do this. It's basically called like a mid-side transformation or modifier or something like that. I found a cheesy workaround inside Studio One where I'm splitting the low end and the high end. Instead of being in the middle and the sides, it's left and right, and then splitting those and adding EQs, and then squeezing things with this mono plugin, and then bringing it back together by retransforming it. Everything below 80 hertz is going to be only in the center. And then everything else is spread across the stereo field, which means it's easier to control later and it's not going to cause all kinds of weird stuff off to the sides. There are plugins that do this. This is a bad explanation of how I've done this. It took me a while to figure out how to do this, but it's a cheeky way of making sure that your kick drum is just in the middle. Then I have Soothe on the drums. It's just tightening up a little bit of the kick and a little bit of the high end so it's not too sharp. And then I have this EQ that's at 69 hertz. There's a separation. My buddy Pete, he does this and it's funny. Yeah, you can't really hear much, but it's supposed to separate the kick and the snare just a little bit. Then I have it going through this preamp plugin. And that's just adding some distortion, because distortion. And then finally, this is a mix tool. It's just a volume knob so that I can control things when I go to automate everything later. And that's the drums. We did it. We got to the end of the drums. So they started like this. So remember, the key takeaway for drums is distortion. The key takeaway from everything is distortion. Now let's move on to the bass. So I'm going to solo it just for now. For bass, I use this plugin called Punk Bass. It sounds great. It's the Mark Hoppus bass, so it sounds like it's pop punk. It's good bass. I'll write out my bass parts in MIDI, and then what I'll do is I'll like humanize them and adjust them so that it feels like a person playing it. Now I've made a mistake. This is a year and a bit ago, so I didn't extend these notes long enough. It's a little sloppy, but sloppy is okay. It's punk rock. It doesn't matter. It sounds nice, right? But let's make it sound even nicer. So first we're gonna compress it. And this is the cheeky thing I was telling you about earlier. Remember when I said to remember this thing right here? So this is a send from the kick. And basically this is going to sidechain input here. It's keyed off of this kick right there. And what that's gonna do is every time the kick hits, it's gonna trigger this compressor to move the bass down. So the bass will never get in the way of the kick drum. The bass will still be there, it'll just get a little bit quieter. We're going really fast, really aggressive, because I just want it to get out of the way as quickly as possible. Then I've got this EQ boosting 60 hertz and then also boosting 3 hertz. Just sounds a little thicker, much nicer. Then we've got another EQ. Oh, it looks like we've just got a bit of a boost at 200. I don't know why, but it must have sounded good. Then I've got this thing called R-Bass. It creates harmonic noise at certain frequencies. So at 80 hertz, which is a fundamental frequency of the bass, it just adds harmonic noise that sounds nice. Cool. I don't know. Just sounds good. There's not a ton on there, but it's just something to spice it up a little bit. And then we've got it going through this preamp again. And that's the bass. Next up, we have guitars. I'll track everything using my guitar that you guys have seen with the Invader pickup. It's a Strat. I love it. It's amazing. I track it all in as a DI. I've broken everything up, so I'll track like the rhythm and the riff guitars or the verse guitars and stuff separate. This is like some feedback guitars, and then here's the chorus guitars. So I use Amplitude 5, and I have a tone that I've made. Cool, right? It's an orange Thunderverb mixed with a Mesa Boogie triple rec. They sound good together. It's being pushed a little bit into a noise gate, and then I've got some high end added to it, but it's very much just a mid-range amp and a high frequency amp, lots of distortion mixed together. I'm using that guitar tone, I think, for the entire song. I'll always double track everything left and right when it comes to guitars, unless I'm trying to have them do different things, but for width purposes, if you double track it and hard pan it, it makes guitar sound really big. Now I'll record everything as best as I can. I don't do too many takes, and then I will do some quantization and editing to make it on time, but I frequently leave mistakes in. Once you start soloing things, you're like, oh, that guitar missed a note or didn't hit the entry at the same time, just because it adds some life. A little trick I'll do also is I'll add a center guitar if there's like a riff. In this case, it's playing a counter melody. But that just thickens things up and adds a bit of dimension to the track. So just like put guitars wherever you want. That's my whole thing, is just like hide guitars all over the place. Like, what's this guitar here? I don't even know. Cool. I forgot about that entirely. Love that for me. This guitar is called Guitar Chorus. What have I done here? Oh, okay, so this is a cool plugin that makes things sound like it's ripped off a VHS tape. It's like one of my favorite plugins. And then I've added some delay, it looks like. Not very much, just like a 13% delay, just to make it a little washy. And then a room reverb, very small amount, just like 2.5. You almost can't even hear the reverb, but it makes it sound washy and weird, which is cool. It's always fun to make strange sounds, especially with guitar that you can hide all over the place. Then I've got these feedback guitars. Okay, so I'm using a feedback effect pedal to make the sounds that you're about to hear. Those are nuts. So those are being fed into a reverb, and I've automated it. So you can see right here that I'm automating down the volume of the feedback guitars over time, but I'm increasing the guitar into a send for a reverb right here, and it's going full wet, 3-second decay, and that's giving that space, and that's kind of the guitar fading into a very large space. I also forgot that our guitars are going into the same reverb, but just not very much. Can't hear it because you don't want it to get too much in the way, but it adds some dimension to the song. That's a thing I'll do a lot, automating into reverbs and adjusting volumes out so things fade away into the distance and kind of disappear, but very slowly. They're not fading out, they're literally like disappearing into the void. And then the chorus guitars, so I'll double track everything except choruses. I will quad track the guitars, so 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And I'll use the same guitar tone that I was using before, but I'll also use one that is just obliterated with extra distortion. I'm using a distortion pedal as opposed to just the amp distortion, so we're pushing even harder. Yeah. And those are just there to bolster. I've got them turned a lot lower, whereas the other guitars are just sitting quite nice. They're all quantized and adjusted to be as close together as possible, but not too perfect. We've got a lot of EQ going on here. So I have an EQ on all the guitars that's boosting about 250, just a bit of low end to make them sound sick, and then pulling out 2K to make some space for the snare, and then a high boost of about 5K because it sounds nice. Just makes them pointier. And then I have even more EQ going on. Looks like just some 8K because there's some sauciness in 8K that we love. Guitars are a very mid-range sound, so they exist in the 300 to 500K range naturally, but it's a fight always to bring out some of those high harmonics to make them really pointy and punchy and make it sound modern and nice. Then I'm doing that thing from before where I'm splitting the frequencies so I can spread the guitars, all the higher range frequency stuff, and then EQ the sides a little bit. See you later, man. Can't hear it much, so whatever I'm doing is obviously for a reason that I can't remember anymore. And this is the preamp. Just making the guitars even saucier with distortion, because what is it, kids? Distortion. Next up, extra sounds that happen throughout the song. Got some tubular bells. Cool, right? That's just like a bell sound that happens every time a riff comes in, I think. It's just to add an accent, and I'm just EQing out some low end, and then I have it sitting there. Anything to make things sound interesting. Then we have a Celeste. If you're unaware, I wrote the instrumental for this song by interpolating Carol of the Bells and then putting it into 4/4 timing. So it's a similar melody as Carol of the Bells, but it's in different time signature. So I've put that melody on this Celeste. A lot of low end taken out. Then we're boosting tons of high end. It looks like we've got 3K and 12K. A lot of sizzly stuff here. There we go. That's increasing the volume a lot too, so of course it's more present now because I turned it way up, but it's nice and sizzly too. And then I have some reverb going on here. Looks like a really long plate, but not heavy on the mix. And sometimes doing that just moves things out of the way a little bit, and it's not as noticeable when you're just listening to the instrumental, but when we get into vocals, having these things moved a little out of the way so that there's space for the vocals to breathe is a good thing. Can barely hear it, so let's see what I've done. Oh, look at that high end. There's so much high end here. 1K, we're boosting a bit, and then really going hard around 6.5 and 12. These are aggressive boosts. Yeah, those are obnoxious boosts, but sometimes you just gotta go for it. Some people say that you shouldn't do big obnoxious moves like this. I say, to hell with those people. What do they know? And then more high end, because why not? I might just be turning the volume up at that point, but you know what? If it sounds good, it sounds good. And this is a distortion plugin that I've got at half distortion. That sounds much better because distortion. And then we're reverbing that out a little bit, very low on the mix, very large 5-second plate. Just to add some space, especially in this section of the song, the guitars go away and it's just the feedback, so there's space for some reverby weirdness. Then there's a choir. I think that's just from the stock sampler in Studio One, and then I'm just EQing it a little bit just to add a bunch of high end because it's a voice, and then it looks like I've taken out about 650. That's good. Tightens up the low end a bit. I love to add sound effects into my songs. That's something that people probably should know by now. Big sound effects guy. So I just found a bunch of these like impact sounds online. Let's check some of them out. Oh, that's like Santa's sleigh. Chimes, always good. And you're not going to notice them so much unless you're really paying attention, but they're just there as like transitionary noises. Things like reversing sounds into choruses or into sections. It can add like a little bit more movement. It just feels like you're being pulled into the next section. Hiding things like that. It's just little production tricks that can add just like a slight bit more to your songs. And there's nothing going on those. It's just, I've just put them in and mixed them to a volume that I like. We're into probably the most complicated section now since drums, and that's gonna be the vocals. And this is probably where I get the most scalpely, the most surgical. I track my vocals. This is roughly what they sound like on their own. This is gonna be embarrassing, but enjoy this.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath the tree.
This one was a little heavier on the comps than I do now, but I think this song was done on my tube mic that I don't use anymore, which is very mid-rangey. And then I'll double it.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve.
And then I comp everything as much as I can to be as tight as possible, so the S's are all in line and the consonants all hit at the same time, so it just thickens up the sound of my voice. Here's where things get a little ridiculous. First, compress the snot out of those bad boys.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs.
Really aggressive on the compression. 8-to-1, similar as before. Let the transient through and then crush the sustain as much as possible. Into the EQ, boosting a bit of low end, pulling out this whatever terrible frequency is going on here, crushing some high end.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath the tree.
Really just trying to bring some of the energy out. I have a very sibilant voice. There's a lot of S sounds when I talk, so I gotta do something about that. This is a de-esser.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFT.
Just really reining in those S's on my voice because it needs to be done. Then soothe, which is effectively another de-esser in this case, but it just smooths out some of those harsh frequencies and those pointed S's and stuff.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve.
Smoother as we go. The soother as we go. And you'll notice that My edits aren't perfect. Things are a little weird, but it's okay because once it's all together, it's going to sound cool, and that's all that really matters. It doesn't matter how it sounds on its own. It matters how it sounds together with the rest of the song. So never worry if you think something sounds weird. If you can't hear it when the rest of the instruments are playing, then it doesn't matter. Distortion. Let's do it.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath.
Just start making my voice as stanky as possible. Auto-tune. As you'll see in a second, I'm not too far off. It's just to adjust things back into place so they don't get too wild and wacky, but I'm not tuning very hard.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath the tree.
Because I'd rather prioritize the feeling of the performance instead of trying to make sure I'm hitting every note perfectly when performing and then cutting into the perfect note takes. I want the ones that feel right. So I go for what sounds best and then I just nudge it back into place. I'm a good enough vocalist that I'm pretty close most of the time, but doesn't matter. It's just to make things fit. More EQ, just boosting 10K on the vocals.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath.
There you go. That's it. That's my vocal chain, or at least that was my vocal chain a year ago. This has changed a bit since then, but with that microphone, this is what made sense. Now, I just copy paste that whole chain over onto the double.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve.
You're like, great, Andy, that's awesome. I don't want to listen to your stupid voice anymore. Let's listen in context.
I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath the tree.
See? It sounds sick. That's what I'm talking about. Now my next trick, and I love this trick, this is a vocal width tool. It's literally just a delay plugin. The right side is 0 milliseconds, the left side is 30 milliseconds, and then it's on a send, and when you feed it, it just makes the voice wider.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs underneath the tree. Santa must be...
You can steal that, and then it looks like I have all kinds of effects going on here. We've got some delay and we've got some reverb. So then everything is sending to this short reverb. It's like a 16th delay.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs.
Then it's going into a room reverb.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs.
Add some space, some dimension. Then I've EQ'd it, just pulled out a bunch of low end.
Shit, I've been ghosted on Christmas Eve. No GIFTs.
EQ your reverbs, take low end out. You don't want low end building up in a reverb, it sounds like crap. And then it looks like I have a specialty reverb, which this is something I'll do, just like make weird sounds and stuff. This is a 8th delay at 100%, feeding into a 2-second reverb, EQ'd. But I've automated it so it only sends to that reverb just on that one word. It gets all weird and then it stops. Otherwise it would build up and it'd be crazy. Automation is key. And then that's the verse vocals. Now I think there's like a special one later where I've done some crazy noise distortion. I've called it Destroy. So for the word depression, we've running it through that VHS plugin again, and then running a flanger to make it super wide. Because it's fun. Use crazy effects like flangers. You never know when it might come in handy. The processing on the vocals will be the same for the chorus vocals. The difference is I have panned the vocals left and right about halfway.
Why am I alone on Christmas?
As opposed to just being in the center, which that adds some dimension for the choruses and makes them a bit thicker. Looks like I'm adding a bit of high end in the 4K. on the chorus vocals only. And those are going to different kinds of reverbs. So I'll use a short delay, short reverb kind of sound in the verses frequently. And then in the choruses, because they're more legato with these long held notes, I'll use like a long reverb. Quarter note delay. You can hear it in the background there. And then that's going into a almost 8-second long reverb that's then been EQ'd for some low end. See, there's a lot of it there. It's pretty nuts. Oh, and then I made a cool effect delay just coming out of the chorus. Quarter note delay as well, with a similarly long thing, but I think because I'm using a different delay, it just sounds different, and I'm hitting it in a different way, so it just adds some texture to this section. I've automated the vocals to come into the center for that one line, so they're not spread anymore. They're right smack dab in the middle. So then I think adding this delay just like adds some space.
No presents for me.
And that's the majority of the vocals. Now, I do a fair amount of harmonies and stuff, but similar with the other vocals, the harmonies are going to usually be doubled and then hard pan left and right, kind of like the guitars. Let's see what this sounds like. This might be super embarrassing.
Santa must be.
That sounds fine. Here's 4.
You're not here.
Oh, cool. Processing on these is not as complicated.
You're not here.
You can hear the sound of the room that I was actually in when I was recording this. So we're compressing similar with the main vocals, almost the exact same.
You're not here.
Then same issue, which is cleaning up the high end and this one bad frequency.
You're not here.
De-essing the crap.
You're not here.
Soothing it.
You're not here.
And then auto-tune. And so with the harmony vocals, unlike the main vocals, I will tune them really hard.
You're not here.
I'm pretty close singing this, and I've copy-pasted that on all of them.
You're not here.
Then that's going to this reverb that's right directly on the aux for the harmonies. It's affecting it just as is instead of going to ascend. That's just what I do with harmonies.
You're not here.
I've learned that harmonies don't need to be the only thing you're listening to in a mix. I don't think I've done any crazy automation on harmonies except for volume automation to move things around in different areas. So
I've been ghosted on Chris.
there's some whispers in there. Here's me whispering to you.
Ghosted.
I think I have some ghost noises too.
Oh,
It's like a Billie Eilish ghost sound.
I guess.
So for that ghost noise, got an 1/8 note delay, and then it's running through a chorus. So what does that sound like?
I guess.
Hey, that thickens it up and just pushes it out of the way. Then the chorus harmonies, I think the processing is basically the same. I have a bit of a shorter plate reverb on it, and then I've added a bit of 4K. Let's listen to all of these together.
Alone on Christmas, alone on Christmas, alone.
That's fun, right? Let's hear what it sounds like with the lead vocals in there.
Why am I alone on Christmas, alone on Christmas, alone?
So that's pretty fun. Yeah, so that's a 4-part harmony that I wrote. Unnecessary in every way, but I did it. So there you go. There's a big gang section here just at the very end. I think it's just people like yelling to make it sound like it's a sleigh ride. This might be really funny. That's so funny. We're compressing that really aggressively. Because it's a lot of voices. There's 10. And then we've EQ'd it. All the low end is gone and just some high end. It's fun. And then I've put this delay directly on the track to make it sound big and wide. It's an 1/8 note delay, and it just makes it feel like it's a huge group of people. So it echoes away a little bit, and then into reverb to soften the delay out. Big, wide, long, 10-second long reverb. And you can just barely hear it, but it's just one of those transitionary things similar to the sound effects. Just drags you into the next section. So it's like you listen with and without it.
No presents for me. Why am I alive?
Right, it hits, but
No presents for me. Why am I alive?
yeah, I think it's fun because it just drags you up in a way. I have my mixes broken down so all of the instruments are going to one aux, which you can see right here. Then I have all of the lead vocals going to one right here. And then I have all of the harmonies and the gang vocals and the effects vocals and stuff going here. So I can independently control them while I'm going into the final mixing stages. It's just a little easier that way. And then if you need to print an instrumental later, it's much easier. Now it's time to do the finale. First, we're going to grab a mix bus compressor. This is based off of the SSL console, and it's amazing. This is probably the most commonly used mix bus compressor. I have it set to a really slow attack and a really fast release. So it's the same as before. You want the transients to come through, and then you want to tighten it so that it kind of pumps a little bit. And we're 3-to-1 ratio. We are compressing -4 dB of gain reduction. So it just tightens everything up. Then we've got a tape saturation plugin. The distortion and the way it glues things together is good, but it's just added like a ton of low end, which isn't awesome. Then I have this plugin. This is called Mixcentric. It's called a sound gooderizer. There are free-ish versions you can find of things like this, but it's just gonna help rein in a lot of the frequencies. So we're hitting it pretty hard, and it's really tightening that low end and bringing it way down and adding some high-end sparkle, which is super duper necessary when you're coming into the final stages and you want your stuff to sound professional, because like sparkly high end and controlled low end is literally the thing that separates mediocre mixes from like pro mixes. Then I'm soothing the entire thing. That's just tightening things up. And then I have that whole thing on the back end where I've got it separated down. So everything beneath 80 hertz on the entire track has been separated and then mixed down using this thing called solo. Turns all of the frequencies under 80 into the mono. So they're only coming out of the center, and then everything above 80 is spread across the stereo field. So the kick is only in the middle and the low end frequency of your bass is only in the middle. And then just a mix tool. And then I have this limiter on here, and this limiter literally exists just when you're mixing. It's just a brick wall, and it's so you don't peak when you're mixing, but over time you'll bring down the volume of everything so that it's ready for mastering. And you'll see it's like -6 dB across the board. Because when you go into mastering, you want the peaks are about at -6, so the loudest moments. One last little automation tweak that I'll do. I'll increase the gain on an EQ that is only affecting the side frequencies in the chorus. Stole that from somebody, not my idea, just to bring up the high end just like a little bit on the sides. And you can only do that through my little tweaky method or getting one of the Mono Maker plugins. Anyway, that is the entirety of how I mixed Alone on Christmas. Go stream Alone on Christmas. Okay, goodbye.